in the pre-show, but were the two most consistent performers across yesterday, coming in as top 1 and 2 seed. As we are jumping on board right now with Huey, Dewey, Louie, the Dark Flight player that we spoke so much about in the pre-show. Yes, this is game 1 starting day 3 of the Oceanic Teamfight Tactics Dragonlance Regional Finals. And I just want to loop back to that point while we are going to be in this stage 1 neutrals of Tamura, a very flexible player. Aurora showed a lot of flexibility yesterday. And if they can carry on that form into today, they could walk away with at least a spot in the ELCQ or even at Worlds.
That's it. The stakes are high, and now players are going to start playing a little bit more, well, aggressively to try to get those points. You know, it's no longer just about trying to secure yourself a half decent enough finish to be able to get points into the next day. Now is pretty much the final few chances that you're going to have. You want to have these good finishes. So it's all really going to come down to, you know, are you going to end up trying to play flexibly, or are you just going to be the Dark Flight player of the lobby? You know, we've seen, you mentioned it before, players that have gone to Worlds have typically ended up focusing on one composition. You know, back in Set 6 TXE with the War Week composition, ended up taking it home. And honestly, the results that Darkflight has been putting up, I wouldn't be surprised that we may see players end up trying to contest it there because they might realize just how strong it is.
Well, Huey was offered to Aphelios in that first shop. Definitely a pair that maybe they would like to hold on and pursue more with that Darklight board. They have shown an affinity for it. We are moving into the first augment. Frosty, you're 1 out of 3 so far. You got the gold augment to start out here. We're on board with Fred. Mirage Crest gear upgrades and Battle Mage. Haven't seen gear upgrades taken much this weekend. I think I saw it once in that Twitch reroll game, and it didn't go so well for Huge Hinge Hunk. What are you kind of favoring out of these?
I'm looking either at a Mirage Crest or a reroll right about now. I'm typically going towards a reroll. Mirage is Executioners here. There's the reroll. I think Portable Forge or Better Together. We see players typically going for a Better Together, but Portable Forge coming out here. Gold Collector, early snowball potential, and it's going to be picked up by Fred here. Picks up the good old rat to go alongside with it here. And that's going to be an early snowball for Fred.
Especially throwing that onto like the 2-star Wukong just to farm up that gold with the extra star powers on that unit. Very strong, the Jade Warrior. 1 cost coming in for set 7.5 has been a quite powerful transition unit for a lot of the players this weekend. As we hop on board with Aurora, who's taken the Beast Stem. Spoke about this a little bit yesterday, but the Shapeshifters, especially just playing around this Na, who is a very popular flex on these like Xiaoyu Siphon boards, having that 35% bonus attack speed is very, very key. And also he's got the Ginsu on this Nidalee as well, who will be benefiting from that.
Yeah, you mentioned it there. The Siphon board really does benefit incredibly well. That dual carry between the Siphon and the Xiaoyu really does benefit from attack speed because it's not naturally built. They're more chunky carries. You know, you can feel like you can really get your bites worth out of a Siphon there. And, you know, Xiaoyu ends up dealing quite a bit of damage, but it's just incredibly nice being able to give your carries that little extra oomph that you'd like to get out of them.
Can see down there in the shop that Nomsy this game is going to be Mage. It's basically just been Mage or Evoker Nomsy played all of this weekend. It's kind of been split in terms of like the win rates and the top 4 rates. It's all hovering around that 5.5 placement, so it hasn't been too successful. On board with Colourful now. Got the Dark Flight, so maybe we'll see a little bit of contention with Huey Dewey Louie. This is something I raised up at the end of the broadcast yesterday, but if someone can contest Huey Dewey Louie on this comp that he's found so much success on this weekend, might not be an easy run for him across these 6 games.
Definitely not, but don't forget that Darkflight isn't necessarily just relegated to trying to 3-star all of its units to make the best board. It can still operate off of multiple 2-stars because of the way that Darkflight naturally works. Being able to get more of those Zeeks onto the board means that you're just going to be pumping out more damage, and since that a lot of the damage isn't just centralized into your main carries, the whole board ends up dealing a heck of a lot more damage as well, especially with the Darkflight Essence.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not just like, you know, spamming Zeeks across the board and like, you know, splashing the aura items. It is the Darklight Essence, which has really become the mainstay of this comp, is if you can get an emblem to splash around, you know, Guild Emblem has been a popular one as well. Just anything to put on that sacrifice unit. The Darklight Essence has come up clutch numerous times for these Darklight units in this board.
Absolutely. We're going to move over to Huey Dewey Lou, who ends up picking up the Guardian Crest. Now, this isn't something that we typically see all too often, and is not really indicative of, you know, which kind of direction these players would like to go up. personally, I think that this will end up being more of that fast 9 style there. You try to get an early 4 Guardian down. You really try to, push the early leverage that you get from having a really strong 4 Guardian showing up early on into the game and just allow your Lagoons to go to work.
I'm seeing some really strong star level boards across this opening stage that we have come across here. Karde's got the Mirage emblem onto this 2-star Lilia. Obviously with Execution and Mirage, there could be a play around that, the IE Jeweled Gauntlet crit Deja that was relatively popular at the start of Uncharted Realms. Huey Jewelry taking a big damage to face there. Guardian emblem, I guess, we're no longer in the heroic presence kind of meta with just Guardian Ezreal reroll. But, it still has a lot of power, especially because Guardian has been a favored frontline option for many players just splashing in around Idis and Rakan.
Oh, absolutely. And the early game transition from a little bit as well. We've typically shied away from Bruiser front lines, except for, the 2 Bruiser front line that goes alongside with a Silas and say something along the lines of a Siphon as well. So seeing the Guardian pop up here, not all too surprising as a really strong early game. Good point mentioned by our wonderful Chaos, who is off in the sidelines here feeding us information. Guardian's back can also be Essence as well. We know that Huey Dewey Louie has loved to go towards that Dark Fight, played a hell of a lot of games of it yesterday, but it looks to be this game that is probably going to end up being contested, so can't really see them going for it. But after all, this is Huey, so can we really say?
He'll play from any position, let's be real.
That's it.
I do want to point out that this Guardian frontline is probably one of the strongest that you can have this early on. He's got the 4 Guardian in. That's a big shield being spread across every time that the Guardian gets dropped below 50% health. And, when you talk about the Cav frontlines, that almost can't really hold a candle to the amount of shields that this is able to put out. But I guess Colorful's really going to put it to the test here. It does have the 2-star Rel and the Lilia up there with the Darkflight emblem. And this Rel has not actually gone down. The Nasus with this Merlinomicon has to do a fair bit of work. And look, the Rel actually stood strong for quite a bit there, and I think that's just really through the power of the Darkflight Essence that we're talking about.
Definitely. I think that this is exactly what Huey wants, though. I think Huey is just trying to start farming up those Lagoon stacks early on, potentially heading towards a Lagoon later on in the game, but Pantheon and Shot may end up posing a different kind of question. Is a pivot worth it? I'm typically leaning towards the no side of things, but it's definitely a choice to end up making here, as it is quite an attractive option.
It is tempting to maybe even pick up the Xayah here and look towards that. Obviously, Morel and Omicron are a very popular item on the Shyvana. The Guardian spat doesn't necessarily die in that, guild Shyvana Xayah comp because of Rakan's presence as well, so you will be able to get the Guardian online. So there are options here, but the real question is, does he want to hold on to, a 4 gold unit on bench this early when he's already sitting on only 20 interest?
It could be potentially detrimental, holding something like, you have to sell off so many of your other pairs. And I mean, look, even Huey Dewey Louie is considering right now, do they want to buy up a Vladimir 2? I think it's a really smart choice to not buy it up, to try to secure this lose streak. Even still, Tamura is decently strong, but is it going to be enough? The Zach ends up going out there. It seems to me like Huey Dewey Louie is not going to be able to lose streak into Krugs there. That's potentially quite large, especially look at the amount of gold that Huey's got. Not all that much.
I think if they maybe were able to maintain the loss streak there was definitely potential to pick up one of the Xayah or Pantheon, sell off the board, and really try and use the extra econ that you generate through Krugs to restabilize by 3-1-3-2 and then purchase it up and build a board around it. But kind of has to forego that. We'll have to wait and see whether that affects the game in the long run throughout stages 3 and 4 for Huey. But regardless, not happy about losing streak there, not happy about losing carousel positioning even there as well. That's a lot of gold that's just going to the wayside, and every little bit of resources counts in these top 8 matches.
Definitely. I love this choice by Huey, by the way, trying to farm up maximum Lagoon stacks before the round ends, just trying to, min-max, especially with this composition. Really does try to get that online for that early little advantage there. Being a 49 out of 50 is a little bit annoying though, but you're only going to get a Reforger, and Reforgers this early in the game, not exactly what you're looking for.
Ooh, this is very, very interesting on the side of Obo. My pick for today, if I must say so, Frosty. He's got the Scale Scorn stacking up with this Olaf, but I spy a little Spatula on that bench dropped off the Krugs.
I also saw something incredibly interesting as well. Look at the first augment choice. That's personal training. So this could lean more into, more of the Olaf style of game. We haven't really talked about Scale Scorn all too much. It hasn't really been showing up in the tournament thus far, but I definitely think that it is still an incredibly interesting option that you could go for. It's pretty darn strong, especially when you do hit those 3 stars. And if players are going to end up playing a more 3-cost reroll along the lines of, say, Darkflight, it means that you're going to more likely hit things like those Olafs and Dianas, which you really need to be able to maximize the composition.
And Ovo has been one of the more favored Scale Scorn players across this weekend. Played it twice yesterday, went 3rd, went 5th. So, okay placements when you're considering it all in all. Like, everyone's going to be playing for wins, obviously, but you can't necessarily be too sad if you're just in the middle of the pack, just keeping those points ticking over. That's how the players like Colourful made it through to today. We move into the second augment choice here. Two from you here, Frosty. Gold augments offered again, and that Scale Scorn emblem is going to be a huge pickup.
Yeah, that if it was a little bit shaky before on what exactly Obo was trying to do, now it is almost certainly the case that we will be seeing a 4 Scale Scorn game from them. And, we were talking a little bit before about, what is the optimal amount of Scale Scorns. You really do want to try to hit 6, but even 4 ends up getting the job more often than not. So, in Obo's position there, they're in a really good spot. They've been stacking up an Olaf as well. They've been getting that personal training down. When you finally hit that critical mass on Olaf, you are going to snowball.
Moving over to Aurora's board, one of the 2 win streak players so far. Aurora and Fred both on 100 HP. Still Colourful also got the flaming hot ring around the little legend. 92 HP moving up against Huey, Dewey, Louie. Got some very nice items onto this. I guess it's just a lot of AP onto this Nidalee. But there's still a lot of options that you can play around with this. The Archangels is still a necessarily flexible option. The Beast then kind of maybe limits where the comp kind of goes, because you'll think, wow, double Archangels on something like a Deju would be super nice. But, there's still different ways that, Aurora can pilot this board.
Oh, absolutely. You say that's fairly limiting, but don't forget there are massive endgame shapeshifters that we end up seeing a ton. Units like Shyvana and Jace is a typical flex that we see in a lot of compositions. And if you're really trying to hit that late game AP option, those can both be really good item carriers as well. Double Archangels tends to be quite flexible between all of the AP that you get later on in the game. So with a star like Aurora's here, it's not too uncommon that we're going to see a really strong late game from them.
Move over to Colourful here, picked up a tome, the Ancient Archives, from that Augment selection, and popped it here. What are you thinking about these options, Rusty?
They suck. They're not a Darkflight emblem. They're not Darkflight Essence. They suck. They are not what Colourful was looking for in this game. So, trying to pick up a Cannoneer Spat is kind of the lesser of most evils that you are offered. Still, not exactly what you want to be seeing there.
Well, have to make do. That's the nature of TFT. Still looking for a pick like that. Rengar has a couple of Philioses in. Playing around that Cannoneer, still hasn't gotten the 4 Cannoneer online. Obviously that has changed a little bit, so a little bit sad here. And taking a potentially a big hit to face here. A 3-unit loss it's looking like against Obo, who's just slowly stacking up this Olaf. Doesn't get the 4AD from the death there. But from Colourful's position here, still has a decent amount of gold. You reckon there's a potential for a 3-5 level 7 here, maybe stalling out until stage 4?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's perhaps, especially in Colourful's position when you're such high health here, the lobby isn't necessarily going all too fast. We do see players that aren't under 50 health quite yet, the danger zone as we like to refer to it. I'd say that it's probably going to be taken quite slow. You're only at 50 gold, and, while you may be missing a few pairs, it's so unlikely that you're going to hit that I'd probably, take the foot off of the gas pedal and try to just play it a little bit slower.
Moving over towards Tamura here, speaking about that danger zone, 52 HP. Lose streak player at heart had picked up, stuff like consistency in tournament yesterday. Really likes going for those weaker stages 2, maybe even into 3 to really spike later on. That playstyle worked for them across yesterday, hitting some very, very capped boards. And it's, been econing throughout the start of this game with the Astral, just ticking that over with a couple of units in there. It's not too much orb value, but now is playing in the Pantheon, slowly spiking up to this 3-5 and really pushing towards maybe contesting on this Olaf. I would doubt it, but potential.
There's potential. That it doesn't really look good. You know, these items are not really Olaf items. What Olaf really wants is something like a scoped weapons or a rapid fire cannon. We don't really see assassin emblem happening all too much now. You know, it is an elusive emblem nowadays. So more often than not, you got to try to make up for that for somehow, because the danger is that your Olaf just runs in, takes it target fire, and then ends up dying. So while I do think that, you know, there is the chance that we see an Olaf game, there is some danger associated, especially if you don't pick up those bows.
Guess we'll have to wait and see. Augments, regardless of what discussions we're making right now, decent shop offered here with a couple of dragons. I think the augments here for Tamura are quite strong. The better together and the Celestial Blessing are about as generic and as good as you can get to really pivot that combo to anywhere. Moving over to Percy Jackson, and this is the playstyle that we were talking about earlier. This is what they love going for. The Astral Shot opener into hopefully landing onto that Shiv Guild Zaya board for 46 HP, level 6. You know, starting to run a little bit low.
I'm shaking my head right now, Ducky. This is, honestly, I don't know what I expected. At this point, yeah, I mean, sure, like, we know that Percy loves this playstyle here, and it's worked out really well for him, but there was a part of me that did actually want to see Percy end up, you know, trying to, you know, show their flex muscles, you know, get their biceps out, really get flexing. So yeah, I don't know what I expected. They're going to probably play Zaya this game. It's probably going to work out pretty dang well for them, but at the same time, yeah, I can't help but be a little bit, you know, what if? What if?
I mean, 38 HP heading into Wolves Series, that getting a little bit dicey when you consider how much this board has to accelerate and relies on hitting, you know, tier 4 and tier 5 units in stage 4 here.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit dicey, but the good news is that they've hit 2 Jaces, which are a massive spike. You know, you could end up hitting a Jace 2. That's probably going to be enough to stabilize, especially with 4 Bruiser, and then only really looking for another Zaya in there, you know, just to be able to cap out the composition. Other than that, I think you're probably going to be safe going into stage 4 there, because players will probably take a little bit of time to try to hit their dragons.
I wonder what card is playing this game. I honestly couldn't, you know, point, you know, it's just so wild to think what he could potentially be played with. All these Cavaliers, Mirages, Executioners this game. He's hoping to maybe get a little bit more of those Executioner style items. Got the Mirage emblem. I'm pretty sure he's looking into that Mirage kind of Cavalier build around the Deja. We'll have to wait and see. We're going down on Percy Jackson's rolldown, as we were mentioning earlier. Hit the level 7, is looking for these eyes, does find the 2-star Jace. But it's like he's having to roll down quite deep here ahead of the augment selection as well. He'll maybe get the 2-star Nidalee. I mean, doesn't even bolster the Astral level, I don't think, because it's a repeat unit, if I'm not mistaken. No, it is a fresh unit, so he's keeping the Astral in to maybe get a little bit more econ here, but not the greatest of rolldowns there from Percy Jackson.
That's a thick Jace, though. Look at that Jace. End up taking up an absolute storm right about now. Huey Dewey Louie is on those Lagoons, and the stacks have been coming through quite nicely. Unfortunately, only a Kai'Sa 1, so, you know, while we were saying that Percy not looking too hot, I mean, this is only a Varus 1, but Varus 1 is going to get the job done. Huey Dewey Louie also finding themselves down in the danger zone right about now as the final selection comes through. I mean, if we're trying to go for the high roll win, Ducky, I gotta say I want to see Ancient Archives here. We're gonna see a guild emblem off of it, but instead chooses to press the attack.
That's a very, very nice read.
But it's a good one.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a very, very good reroll there for Percy Jackson. PTA probably the best augment that you could really hope for at this kind of stage of the game. And is now really just waiting on that Zaya, and can find basically every other tier 4 unit in the shop except it. We'll check back with Percy Jackson whether they actually hit that Zaya. They got the Twitch 2 there. We're over to Aurora's board, who we did mention where these Archangels would be going on to, and the Deja is where it's at.
Deja is definitely where it's at, and look, there's also been a guild emblem being picked up here, so, you know, the potential for Beast's Den to be a little bit of a dead item, or, you know, a dead trait there could potentially come up, but I think, you know, it's probably still going to be active. We see that Jace is such a flexible unit that even something, you know, as simple as sticking a Gnar in there as well is going to end up working wonders. As you see, all it needs is just raw damage. Executioners ends up dealing a ton.
is very, very powerful. Also, the guild emblem picked up there. Nice little splash into this comp as well. Can itemize vertically towards that. What do you think the Mirage kind of caps out here? Do you reckon he's going to be chasing that 6 Mirage, or is just going to be sitting at 4 for now?
Well, 6 Mirage may be excellent. You know what's also excellent? An egg giveaway in chat right now. Don't forget to type !egged so that you can try to secure your very nice egg. I think that more often than not, players will try to flex towards guild, but getting higher stacks of executioner can be very nice for the composition. You know, it does end up going up to 100%, always dealing those crits, and with that double Archangels, that's a ton of damage, Ducky.
Yes, it is indeed. And 82 HP has a lot to play around with. Hitting this power spike at level 7, by the way, is kind of nutty. Getting that to the 2-star dage this early. We are getting a little bit of a look at how Percy Jackson board is going so far, and still in that Xayah waiting room. It's getting a little bit, you know, dire. Matching up is probably the strongest player in the lobby right now. Couldn't get an exact look at it. Obviously, Aurora's not win streaking right now. Obo is the one win streaking player with the flame around their little legend, but Percy Jackson, 29 HP, still no Xayahs. This is, you want to start pivoting out of this Astral board now before it gets too weak.
It's really unfortunate, you know. You've rolled down about the equivalent of about 60 gold, and you haven't found a single Xayah, and all you really got to show for it is a Varus 2. And while Varus 2 is a pretty strong unit there, it's definitely not the big unit that you want to be seeing. It's not that Xayah, so unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be working out all too well for Percy Jackson, but my pick of the tournament, Kade, is pretty much one loss from death already. I don't know how this even happened.
Look, I think, you know, Kade was kind of contested on this Mirages. Like, he was definitely looking down that way, and when you've got someone like Aurora who's just, yep, I've got the Dages already, like, it's so hard to come back from that position. I'm having a look over at some of the augment selections as well. In the back room, we've been able to calculate it all. One that's taken my eyes, Louis has taken the High Tide, which is something that we haven't spoken about a lot this weekend for that Lagoon board.
But there's, I mean, you want to talk about the big carry of the composition here. Fred has managed to hit the notorious Alshin. You know, the big carry in these sorts of compositions here. And realistically, it doesn't even matter what's centered around the Alshin, does it, Ducky? Because it just deals so much damage. If an Alshin casts, the fight is pretty much over.
I mean, yeah, that was the story of yesterday. There was a lot of Alshin gameplay yesterday, mostly around the Demancer board, but we've seen it flexed with basically every other situation under the sun, whether it be whether it be other dragons in like the 4 Dragons board, whether it be a Shio that we have seen, or Guild. Right now we're seeing it with the Whispers board, and this Alshin does need a cast if it actually wants to be good. This is a big charge from the Siphon, does farm a little bit of gold off it. Is there enough left on this Alshin? Yes, it is, and it is, like I like to say, Frosty, it's a thrill diff.
Oh, an absolute thrill, an absolute delight indeed, Ducky. I was getting a little bit worried there because the fights were starting to get a little bit close, but it seems like the Archangels was all that was needed. So we see a Jace 2 coming in the shop. Everything is truly going Fred's way for this first game. You know, starting off with the Gold Collector is actually a really good one, especially if you're trying to, you know, go up to those high levels. Look at Fred's gold. He pretty much hasn't had to roll, is at 56 gold, and is in a prime position to go into that extraordinarily strong late game dragon composition.
I would love to be able to calculate how much that collector at 2-1 that he took has farmed him across the game, because that probably explains the large econ lead. We are on board with Kade, who has managed to hit that Danger 2 that we were talking about, but is it too little too late for him?
I am worried because I'm looking over at the other side of the board. I'm seeing Obo, who's managed to hit scoped weapons and also has a rapid fire cannon. It just probably is not enough. Big loss comes through. Kade is out in 8th before even seeing a treasure dragon. An absolutely detrimental start to their tournament day today, Dougie.
And Kade needs a big day today, sitting 7th, I think, off the top of my head, on the championship points leaderboard. So needs to place around that top 3 kind of position to really push through towards Worlds. Obviously, with like a more guaranteed spot in the top 2 with the LCQ points. We move over to the Treasure Dragon here, and we've got an Order Treasure Dragon with the guaranteed Radiant item. Tamura takes the Radiant Rapid Fire Cannon.
Yeah, it works really well, especially on that Siphon there. No longer has to go into melee range to charge up that big bite. Siphon 2
Ooh.
also coming into shop here. Tomorrow's pretty much hit the entire board, Ducky. It's really hard to say exactly what you'd end up wanting to hit here as well. What are you going to replace most of these units with? All that's missing is a Pantheon 2, and, maybe if you're lucky, also a Yasuo 2. I can't think of anything else, though.
We'll have to wait and see. On board here with Tamura, it's a very interesting way that he's kind of building around this. This is the Shiryu Siphon board that we have spoken a lot about this weekend. Moving over to Huey Jui Louis, who is one position away. Got the Edge of Night, the Radiant version of it on that Nyla with this Sohm board. Is probably the second most popular board for Huey this weekend, outside of that Darkflight Rengar. Hasn't been able to hit much anyways.
Yeah, and it looks like Huey is going to be going Sohm really soon if he doesn't manage to secure a win. Coming up against the board of Tamura, who has hit all of their power spikes. I worry for Huey. This is only a Sohm 1, and just look at the damage that these dual dragon carries end up pumping out. The Nyla is also no slouch. Big and Vuln from Zoe. Big chomp coming down onto the back line there. Can the Tide Blossoms end up popping? No Tide Blossoms. It's all up to Nyla with that Radiant Edge of Night, but it looks like the Dual Dragons will just be too much. That's Huey out in 7th.
And those are some really, I think we didn't necessarily touch on it too much. Tamura's got 5 out of 6 items on them as well. Sometimes we see these Shiryu Siphon boards where they haven't been able to itemize the 2 dragons. This is a very well itemized Shiryu Siphon board, so could potentially climb up into the top 4. Has been one of the more consistent boards we've seen across this weekend as we move over to Fred, who, as a determined investor, has finally hit those diamond hands onto this Alshin with the Radiant Jeweled Gauntlet.
This is just so scary. Looking at this board and knowing exactly that this isn't even at its final form yet, there's just so much left to go. And sure, I mean, the Shimmer Scale is really nice, but just imagine what happens when the Idas comes into play. The Siobhan as well, the Terra. All things considered, the board will truly be a Terra. And coming up against Percy Jackson, noticing that there is still no Xayah on board, the Alshin's going to get a big cast, but it looks like the Diamond Hands won't save it. Seems like Percy Jackson barely manages to cling on for another fight.
Was maybe one tick on that Olaf away to getting the thrill going and potentially farming that back up, or at least making it a little bit of a lighter loss. That is a bit of an unfortunate loss for Fred, but we are seeing them send it here. Has picked up the Alshin pair, has the Champion Duplicator on bench as well, so can just duplicate it for a 2-star, but probably will roll it first, just to see whether they can hit it naturally in the shot with these increased roll odds at level 9. Does hit the Idas, which is very good. Can take out some of these weaker Shimmer Scale units and maintain those diamond hands, which is exactly what they have done. They had been holding a 2-star Jace on bench for so long. They made that back in early stage 4, I think, and we're holding it on bench for that moment, and it's now hit and pivoted into that highly capped 4-dragon board.
Yeah, but I wonder if this is going to be enough. Tamura is incredibly strong right about now, especially with those good aura items. Watching the Idas try to do its best to tank up against the Siphon and Xiaoyu. There's too much health on the dragons though, and the health pool is rapidly depleting from this Alshin. Big cast comes through, but the damage just isn't there. It looks like the cast will not be enough. Fred takes another loss.
Edge of Night was so clutch there onto that Siphon. Edge of Night just, mitigating a little bit of the cast there from the Lightning Rain was very, very good. But
yeah, it's that brief invulnerability. It just stops it for a quick little second there, and that's sometimes all the difference is with that Alshin, Ducky.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And the one thing that I'm still seeing from this board right now from Fred is they don't have the mana generation on that Alshin, so by the time it's getting around to casting, it just doesn't have the front line to be able to hold back the wave and maybe potentially get a second cast. You're really relying on that max cast with that, maybe 60 AP off of the Archangels. So it's a little bit rough. Maybe needs to get some frontline items off the upcoming PvE round to really shore up that board. We are on board now with Obo, though, who's on 6 out of 9 Olafs. Hasn't been able to hit that Olaf 3, but really hasn't, sweated too much. We spoke about the scope weapons earlier, so that Olaf is just your regular unit nowadays with the regular range.
Fred managed to hit that Alshin too on the side there. But I mean, yeah, they don't even need it. You know, this is just such a strong board. Olaf 3 is pretty darn good. You know, it gets that extra bit of AD, that incredible health boost. But I mean, when you just see the damage that this Olaf is pumping out with the 4 Scale Scorn, 4 Warrior in there as well, this may be an incredibly large good old Deja, but the damage being pumped out is just way too much from Obo.
That's a really good loss for Aurora. That was looking like a 5-unit loss, and then the last little wind blast taking out a lot of units did mitigate that somewhat. Only the Olaf left alive. Important to note, Obo's got that Tactician's Crown playing around with, so the extra unit slot as well. We're back on board with Tamura, and we were talking about the strength of the Shiryu Siphon board and hitting now 6 out of 6 items across these two. But the one thing that I'm looking at is the rest of the board is just not there. There's no like decent defensive items on this Pantheon to keep it alive and keep proccing those Whispers.
Yeah, but does it really need it?
I think it probably
when you're pumping out so much damage. I mean, this will probably be the good test here against a board like Colorfuls, right?
I mean, Colorful, like, with this Rengar, won't be able to, like, jump onto some of these weaker armor targets. Like, he's jumping onto the Jade statues here and get a lot of work done jumping around. So, like, it's maybe a beneficial matchup in that regard, but I'm looking at the rest of the lobby that Tamura is facing up against here, and it's a little bit of an uphill battle. Like, Percy Jackson is now on that win streak, so probably has hit that Xayah. Never mind, they are now lost that win streak. I've just brought it up and pointed out that's where it's gone. So, if you know, this board can't access those backline carries, and it's a bit rough.
Definitely. I think the healing from 5 Jade as well does actually provide quite a good defensive option. And this is
That's not a defensive option.
Yeah, that's not a defensive option, but it's also kind of interesting because we've seen full offensive items go on to the Siphon and the Shiryu, but there is no more slots left for this Ginsu's to go on. I mean, the best choice is probably something along the lines of, say, I don't know, a Bard.
I guess, yeah, maybe you throw it on the Bard so you can get the extra Temper Fate called, or like Temper Fate costs, and get, you know, more dancing happening. But what's the likelihood of this Bard casting twice in a combat? That's the other question we have to ask ourselves here.
Yeah, it's a little bit tough to be able to see. Obo is going to be taking a big roll down. On the other hand, Forgoes going level 9 just so that they can really try to hit the Warrior Spike. Manages to find Diana too. That's also kind of an important one to end up hitting there, mind you. Pantheon 2 also going to be quite big, and we're probably going to see them just take it slow from this point on, you know. I think, you know, until Obo's really in that dire situation, we're probably going to see him just try to chill for the rest of the game.
1 Olaf out of the 3 required hit there. Did want to point out that Colorful with that Darkflight board that we mentioned earlier, hitting the Rel 3, so Stein is back with that. Now this is a big test for Tamura actually. I think this is a kind of board where the Shiryu Siphon can get the right targeting here. The Siphon does end up biting onto the Olaf. The Siphon R&D lottery works there in the favor of Tamura, and it might be enough here because obviously that was the main damage threat of this comp.
It's kind of unfortunate, you know. I think Mordog probably learned their lesson with Siphon in set 7 there, tried to make it a little bit weaker, but with this composition it ends up being a good old set 7 Siphon running in, killing that one carry that you really didn't want to end up having it targeted. I mean, you know, talking about frustrating experiences, again, I think that is probably up there.
Yep.
Oh, look at all the Dianas coming into shop here, but, you know, even though Diana is so good in this composition, you just want to hit Olaf here. That's the only thing. It's going to take one more roll. Doesn't end up finding it. Finds a Diana instead, a consolation prize, but is still one Olaf off. Percy going out in 6th as well.
Yeah, Percy losing to the board of Colorful there, so didn't actually get to see what Percy's board looked like at the end with the Xayah and building that around, but was very slow in that mid-game to transition, didn't leave themselves a lot of HP to play around with. So that's probably the explanation for that. But you are seeing, like, when this Olaf board doesn't get sniped randomly by a Shiryu Siphon, it can be very potent. And this board from Aurora can't stand up for long enough for these Deja Wind Blasts to go through, and it's just a matchup diff, honestly, for Obo at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Important thing to note on the sidelines, Fred, you know, our level 9, our fast 9, level 2 Dragons play, hit Alshin already, is at 1 shot now.
Yeah, that one life.
6. That's
Yeah.
it. It's, I mean, you know, we were talking about the power of this board, but looking around, it seems like everyone else is kind of able to match that power. Look at all of these units, Ducky. There's a Shyvana 2, there's an Idas 2, there's a Terra 2, there's an Alshin 2, and these combats are still not going their way.
Yeah, that's a little bit surprising when you think about it. And like the Terror is very strong and it's got the immunity off the Diamond Hands as well. The, let's be real, the Shyvana items aren't the greatest, but they're making do with what they can with this board. And the Idas 2 upgrade hit just before that combat could be key here. Up against Obo though, this, you know, Terror has a lot of work to do to try and keep this Olaf at bay, and it's just getting absolutely chunked out so far. We're looking at the mana bar of this Alshin. It's at 70% now, creeping up towards 80%, but the Olaf is slowly pushing through. The Shyvana has big work to do. The Hand of Justice coming through clutch with this healing and just leaving enough time for the Lightning Rain to come through. The Dragon's Claw soaking up a fair chunk of damage here on this Braum, and as well as the Radiant Warmogs with that extra bonus healing from the Radiant item, but this Braum will eventually go down. Yep, the Collector proc come through, and Obo lives on with 1 HP. And by the way, our entire lobby is basically one hit now. 14, 9, 8, 3, and 3.
Yeah, but I mean, looking at the item choices here, Obo manages to get the Shroud, which is absolutely massive in these late game fights. Both players, Aurora and Obo, recognizing the importance of these utility items. We've seen fights being won and lost depending on the positioning of these Zephyrs, of these Shrouds, and you know, also really important to note, Alshin's mana bar is at 200. So you shrouding that is going to add on another, I believe, 80 or so mana if my math checks out there. I mean, we're casters, we're not here to do math.
It's a 40% mana reave or something, so 40%.
Something like that.
Yeah, so that would be 80. If it's 40,
So,
I can't quite remember. But yes, it's a significant amount, especially when it doesn't have mana gem with like attack speed or an augment like Cybernetic Uplink or the Sphere of Shojin. So yeah, it is a long time for this Alshin to cast, and that will be the one weakness of this board. Back on board with Tamura, who has felt like the Shiryu Cypher board has felt so hot, so not so hot again. He's getting a decent amount of stand value now, got those 8 traits online for this stand too, the Celestial Blessing, the Better Together. Very nice augments as well, something that we maybe have failed to mention in the past. The Soraka heal coming through quite clutch as well. The Soraka is not something that we've necessarily considered so far this game. That one heal might even be enough to potentially live through this combat if they took one more unit, but no.
No, it seems like it's at the end of its life cycle. Aurora at level 9 with that Deja board is going to be enough to take out some more of the Soifan going down. And seems like Fred is locked in Mortal Kombat, comes up against the Swain, proving to be too tyrantful. That's not a word.
You tried.
I tried.
And we go from 5 players to 2 players left in this lobby with one fell swoop. We are back on board with Colourful. We're worrying about the positions. We were worried about that Ancient Archives, the tome that he took at 3-2, but has managed to make this emblem work out for them, this Cannoneer emblem that's now being sacrificed to the Darkflight gods and Tyrant Swain. And could be on par for a first here up against Aurora and this Deja, but it's all about this Rengar potentially assassinating the Deja.
Oh, and look at that beautiful positioning around the Zephyr as well, allows the Swain, but there's so much damage coming through. The Swain's already gone, but it looks like the Tabby manages to find its way onto the backline there. Huge electro damage coming through. There is going to be one winner, and it is going to be Aurora, who is going to be taking it home with that Executioner Deja composition. Well played. Well played.
And this is our player who has qualified through the Last Chance Tempest Cup